I hope you all had a great day today.
Yes, thank you very much, Richard.
Excellent. The mojitos were good. The questions will be loose. Glad you all had a good day. I hope you had some good snacks before we came in here. Two things this evening before dinner. One is the conversation that we're about to have. And then following that, we're going to do our 7 remaining Ignite talks, and then on to dinner. And then after dinner, for those of you who are still game, there will be continued werewolf. By the way, there's one rule. For those of you here who last night were victorious, like poker, you can't just take your winnings and go home. You have to go back and defend your honor. So let's talk about the Panama Papers. According to Smari McCarthy, the CTO of the Organized Crime and Corruption Reporting Project, something in the area of $32 trillion is being hidden in offshore tax havens at the moment. As McCarthy put it, we're now watching probably the largest transfer of wealth from developing countries to developed countries since the Spanish armadas were moving around. Nice being in Spain. Late in 2014, an anonymous whistleblower reached out to the Munich-based newspaper Süddeutsche Zeitung and handed over what we now know as the Panama Papers. 11.5 million documents from the Panamanian law firm Mossack Fonseca, 2.6 terabytes of data. Interesting point of context, 2.6 terabytes of data these days can fit on a drive about this big. I, 2 years ago at NewsGeist in Phoenix, had the great pleasure of interviewing Daniel Ellsberg. And one of the things I think a lot of us sort of missed in the historical context is that the Pentagon Papers were about 7,000 documents, 7,000 pieces of paper that he had to hand copy, on a Xerox machine in his apartment. That's a stack of paper. That's a big stack of paper to haul around and leak. So just interesting different dimension in the math and physics of leaking today. The investigative team at Süddeutsche Zeitung realized fairly quickly that with 11.5 million documents, that was likely to exceed their ability to really thoroughly analyze it. And so they reached out to the International Center for Investigative Journalism to take part in the effort. If you're not familiar with the ICIJ, it's not a new organization. It's been around for almost 20 years. It was founded in 1997 by the well-respected and very capable investigative journalist Chuck Lewis, who did great reporting for 60 Minutes for years and years and years. ICIJ was actually launched as a project of the Center for Public Integrity, and the Center for Public Integrity continues to be the parent of ICIJ. And it's, I think, a phenomenal organization and has done some extraordinary work. Ultimately, on this project, as many of you know, over 100 news organizations joined in that effort. So we have 2 people with us today to talk about this. Gerard Ryle, of the head of the ICIJ, couldn't be here this weekend, but Peter Bale, the CEO of the Center for Public Integrity, is indeed with us. And he can talk about that dimension of the effort. I'll go into a bit more details on each of them in a second. And secondly, next to me here is Bastian Obermeier, who with his colleague Friederike Obermeier, no relation, broke the story for Süddeutsche Zeitung. So today, this is an AMA. Ask me anything. Ask them anything. I'm going to start off after a bit of introduction with just a few opening questions, and then we'll turn it over to the audience. We'll have microphones to circulate. Peter and Bastian noted beforehand that whereas we have Chatham House rules for the conference, they're comfortable with this session being on the public record. So I thank them for that, very gracious on both their parts.
Unless we say otherwise in some hideous moment.
Unless they say otherwise.
We will.
Yes. Bastian, of course, works as a reporter for the investigative unit of Süddeutsche Zeitung, where he has long specialized in investigations since about 2005. The various efforts on his part included Nazi war criminals, serial killers, sexual abuse in Catholic boarding schools. He's received numerous reporting awards for his work, including the Theodor Wolff Prize in 2009, the Heinrich Nannen Prize in 2010, and the Helmut Schmidt Prize in 2013. And it's really wonderful having you here this evening.
Very happy to be here.
Thank you. Peter, as I noted, is the CEO of the Center for Public Integrity, a role he's held since 2014. Before that, Peter was at CNN International, where he ran CNN.com and other digital products outside the United States. Before that, Peter spent 15 years as a correspondent for Reuters, later worked at the Financial Times as the founder of the award-winning FT Market Watch, and was later online editorial director of the Times and the Sunday Times of London. Thank you, Peter, for being with us.
Thank you
as
for
well.
having me. You leave out the Microsoft bit because it just doesn't fit with the Google, right?
And he worked at Microsoft. No, absolutely not. I worked at Apple. So, Bastian, why don't we go back to the beginning? Can you take us through... Tim Cook has his ways. Love those Macintosh products. Could you take us back to the beginning when the source first reached out to the paper? How exactly did that happen?
Well, it happened in a kind of very private moment. I was visiting my parents with my wife and my kids, and everybody was very sick, so there was a lot throwing up going on, and I was the only one who was still standing, and I had to go here and there in this room, and I got this message, this first message and the second message, and I couldn't really react to this because I had to go to my son who was crying and had to do all this stuff. So it was a really hard day because I was very nervous because, each source wants to be cared about. You have to give them the feeling that you really want to know this story, and you exclusively, because you don't want the source to go away. So I was kind of, torn between my kids and all that, delivering tea and going back to somebody who says he's got a lot of documents that would really interest me. But in the end, it turned out quite good.
Indeed. Now, as I understand it, to this day, you don't know the name of the source.
No.
And so, how did you get comfortable with that, with getting to the point that the source was reliable?
Well, we got very confident about the documents. We checked them in various ways, through public registries, through court documents, and we found nothing that would anyhow irritate us. And so in the end, nobody said those were falsified, not even Vladimir Putin. He said those were correct. So we were quite fine after we checked thousands of documents, and we found a leak that had been leaked to the German authorities 2 years before from the same law firm, Mossack Fonseca, which was like 5 or 6 years old and only 500 or 600 companies, which overlapped with like 200,000 companies we had. So we were really confident, but in the same time we had to make sure in every piece that we made that we reported on correct things. So we did what we could do, and in the end we went to the people we wrote about and said, hey, look, we've got this document. We think that you might have misused money, power, whatever. And nearly nobody said it's not true. They said, well, let me explain. Or not, but most tried.
And do you have any clue as to why you and why Süddeutsche Zeitung?
Well, not really, to be honest. I'm very sure that the leaker has turned to other news outlets too. So I was obviously the only one who reacted very fast, although my kids were thrown up. But this is because I guess I knew the company Mossack Fonseca before from things we did with ICIJ to Swiss leaks and offshore leaks and all that stuff. So I was aware that the documents I saw in first were really, really good and interesting, and more that I would be very interested to get more where this came from. Maybe because Jürgen Mossack, one of the founders, is German, the leaker may have thought there would be some kind of interest, at least, and maybe because he or she knew that we have been involved in offshore leaks, Swiss leaks and Luxembourg leaks, so he knew that we would be into the topic. So maybe at some point the leaker may have said, well, I don't care about the big name of the news outlet. I want to have somebody who's listening and who knows what I'm talking about. And this may have been our moment.
I mean, you had, I believe, been reporting on or doing some work on offshore material.
Yes.
Now, you mentioned that when this first came about, you were dealing with a sick family, and I also read somewhere that you noted that there were times when you communicated more with the source than with your wife.
Some days, yes. No, we had a kind of constant communication that we had for more.
This is by voice, not just.
Not by voice, only by measures of encrypted communication. So you don't even say it was signal or terror or whatever. It's just we had some and we switched from time to time to make sure that we're not watched. So we were very careful because from the very beginning it seemed kind of obvious that there could be danger for the source. And this is one of the reasons why I didn't really try to make him tell his name, because I knew that the best way to protect this person was me not knowing this person, because then I couldn't make mistakes, I couldn't lead to this person. And it was a way for me and my family to make us more safe, because nobody can come and say who it is if I don't know. Well, people have to believe that I don't know. So this is what I'm doing when I talk. I really don't know that. I really don't know.
Yeah, no, that makes perfect sense. So Peter, with the ICIJ effort, as we've noted, 107 news organizations, 400 journalists. How did ICIJ select the news organizations who participated? And I noticed, for instance, that some notable news organizations, including the New York Times, were not on that list, and noticed somewhere that the New York Times actually said that they were never offered participation. So what was the process? How did you go about it?
We were just discussing this today. Let me just go back a couple of steps, because these things don't come out of nowhere. So Jared Ryle, whose story really this is, with Süddeutsche Zeitung owning the leak, but Jared has created over the last 4 years, or built on top of the network that existed, a remarkable kind of leak retrieval machine. He arrived at the centre 4 years ago, before I was there, with a parcel with a very large leak from the British Virgin Islands, which became offshore leaks, which to some extent then became the work that's been done by a number of people about particularly the Chinese administration's connections to offshore connections. And then we've had Lux leaks, offshore leaks, other investigations. My personal favourite, which started a week after I arrived, which was slightly shattering to step into, was Swiss leaks. I mean, Swiss leaks, if you read this week's, or last week's New Yorker with the Falciani leak, the guy who leaked it, or stole it, depending on how you like to look at it, is a remarkable thing, because it documents blood diamonds, child smuggling, trafficking, you name it, and it involves the scandalous behaviour of a British listed bank, HSBC. Now, having built all of that up over these years, I mean, the work that's been done since 1997 of building the trust between these people who are members of the ICIJ is phenomenal. But over the last 4 years, Jared, his colleague Marina Guevara-Walker, and a woman called Mar Cabra, based in Madrid, have built the platforms that allow this collaboration to become real. It's no longer just based on email and phone calls. And so it was really Swiss leaks, and if you read the manifesto from the leaker of the Panama Papers, it was Swiss leaks that persuaded him that Süddeutsche Zeitung and the ICIJ had the scale combined to handle a leak of this scale. And I don't think we necessarily did at the time. Swiss leaks was the biggest leak of its time. The coordination that was required on that was phenomenal. But Panama Papers was a whole nother step up. In several respects, the ICIJ team had to rework the iHub, which is the collaborative platform that they use, which has two-factor authentication and has allowed investigative journalists in The Guardian, the BBC, Süddeutsche Zeitung, to have the documents embedded in their newsrooms in a secure fashion that is not open to other journalists, and as we've shown with this, did not leak. I mean, the fact that the leak did not leak is remarkable. Even people who were, The Guardian has devoted 6 to 8 people in this for a year. BBC's had a similar number of people. That requires a level of commitment, and that's where this issue of collaboration with other big publications, New York Times and others, comes in. Jared and his team are very careful to choose people who they know are up for actual collaboration. They have this line about leaving your ego at the door. And a lot of brands can't leave their egos at the door, whether they were the individuals or the brands. And so they go for people with a proven history in collaboration. And they did offer, both the leaker has offered this to a number of other people, and we have offered, or the ICIJ has offered collaboration opportunities on the story to a number of other publications who chose not to take it. I'm not going to crap on any other publication ever because it's a bad thing to do. It is true, and I think it's public now pretty much, that the New York Times is now inside the consortium working on this project, as is the Washington Post. That was much more of a direct approach to Süddeutsche Zeitung to get permission to that. And that's, in a sense, the ICIJ has offered software journalism as a service, if you like, to the Süddeutsche Zeitung as the owner of the leak. We've done the distribution of it, the coordination of the network, and then the area that you probably want to ask me about as well is the analysis of the documents, which I think is one of several triumphs in this whole project.
Okay.
Well, and Bastian probably knows more about this than I do, but in fact, when I also used the spell checker, Bastian comes out as Bavarian, which is kind of ironic as well. The core competence that I believe resides in the ICIJ and to some extent in the rest of the Center for Public Integrity is probably the most modern approach to collaborative journalism, i.e. an oxymoron. Two things don't go together, collaboration and journalism, and data journalism. So the center really was one of the sort of founding pioneers of data journalism over the last 15, 20 years. But the thing that the ICIJ has done, I think, is in two areas, is this core competence of taking... so let me describe Swiss leaks for a moment rather than the Panama Papers. 56,000 pages of PDFs, totally machine unreadable, theoretically. We made them machine readable, analyzable, and extracted the journalistic meaning from them, made them searchable. And I think this is the key to data journalism for me, the little sliver which is extracting the journalistic meaning. And one of the things that I admire, so they have become world experts at this extraction of meaning. And then
there's millions now.
Correct.
That had to be.
Yeah. So this is 56,000 pages of documents, now 11.5 million pages of documents. So the pretty much open source, although we have a couple of relationships with an Australian search company called NewsGeist, which has been helpful, I think, for 3 of these huge search projects to extract meaning from these documents. They've used a fantastic piece of, I think, open source software called Blacklight, which allows the relationships to be displayed. And then they've done with a Spanish company called Lincurious, which allows us to do these kind of exploded charts of all the relationships, which we actually even use for fact-checking. One of the things that I love about it is that you can put Putin in there as a fact-checking exercise and confirm that the companies that we're saying his associates affiliated with are there. So this is not just it's the whole journalistic process is there. And then the second area that they've done brilliantly is the distributed collaborative platform. So I think there's two huge skills in there that I regard as core competences in the ICIJ and the CPI, but at now somewhat different scale in the ICIJ, is this ability to take enormous data sets, extract them safely, extract them accurately, and extract journalistic meaning from them, and then separately to make them then available in a safe, collaborative environment for in this case, 370 journalists. 400 now.
Well, I just think it's an extraordinary testament to ICIJ and how that organization has evolved to be able to develop those trusted relationships. And still remarkable that it could go for a year without...
There are fewer than 11 people who've done this. And part of my job is to raise the money to allow that project to happen. It's incredibly expensive, relatively speaking, but not relative to anything else we all spend money on. It really is 11 people in the ICIJ who've created this possibility, both engineering-wise, platform-wise, and in terms of secrecy.
We'll be passing the hat at the end of the session.
Do you want to say anything about the platforms you use, Sebastian?
Well, it's very, very helpful because it's like a Facebook for journalists, for investigative journalists. You can, if you have a lead and you end on a black wall because it's leading to Ecuador, and I have no clue how to investigate in Ecuador, I can just leave a note there and say, hey, I have this paper showing the money's routed to Ecuador. Anybody's up here to help? And I get maybe 5 likes and one person who answers, yes, I have a source there. And this is a person from Ecuador who is inside our 400 person team. And this was Monica, and she really found the document showing that the European soccer had managed to make money with a company in Ecuador, which was not right. So there was money flowing, millions going there, and we could show that there was a problem, and I couldn't have done this. So it's really, really helpful.
Get ready with your questions. I have just one more for you, Bastian. While the effort has gotten appropriate and high praise, and I'm sure you'll be collecting a few more awards, I'll bet on that one. Some have expressed disappointment, not in the project, but in the sense that the story hasn't had legs. Now, maybe that varies in part of the world. What was your expectation when you went out with this, and has the response to the story been what you expected, more, less? Do you share that same disappointment?
No, my expectations were far lower than what happened. I mean, it's not so usual that your story makes it front page news on New York Times, Wall Street Journal, and FT for days, and it's not usual that Barack Obama says, naming the Panama paper and announcing that he will change the rules of his government, and it's not usual that Panama now lately agreed to the automatic data exchange, and there are many things that happened. I mean, there's been one head of state who had to step back, and the European Union set up a special commission to really investigate this issue, the Panama Papers Commission. So there's so many things happening. We have the same discussion in Germany. If you only look in one country, you might say this is a little disappointing because in Germany nobody stepped back, and well, they will have new rules now. Our Minister of Finance just announced that as one of the things that he learned from Panama Papers. We have to make the beneficial owner of a company viewable for the public to see. So he wants this to happen, and people should be forced to explain where the money came from they have on a Swiss bank account or wherever. So there's a lot that really followed, but if you look at one specific country, you might be disappointed. But if you draw the whole picture, then I'm really thrilled. I would never have imagined that. So I mean, Barack Obama responding would just be enough for me if I have a story. But this whole thing was, it's not, I haven't even, I would have been very proud to see that there is people from a truck cutter arrested in Uruguay, but this is only about the number 65 on my list. So there's really a lot going on. It's we as journalists, we are not activists. I'm not saying I have to fight now against tax havens, but we will look at it and if you see in a year that nothing happened, what has been promised, we'll say nothing happened. Hey, go act. You said you'll act, but it's not my responsibility to take action. That's of the politicians. And one thing that just came back to my mind is what struck me most was that in 6 or 7 countries there have been mass demonstrations because of our investigation. And this is something you don't forget ever. And so I'm not really disappointed.
Richard, could I add something to that?
Yes.
Because I think if you think about it, it may not yet have been quite as enormous in the United States because there are relatively few Americans mentioned in the documents. This isn't a conspiracy, by the way. There are very good reasons why there are relatively few Americans in the document. Donald Trump, I think, is mentioned 3,500 times in the document. Sorry, he isn't mentioned as an entity in the document, and therefore it's unlikely that he's a factor in it. But who knows what the New York Times and the Washington Post will find that McClatchy hasn't. But I can't recall a more global story happening instantaneously in so many countries. I announced this at 2 o'clock in Washington time when I was at a conference in San Francisco, and it all came out. That was instant global. That was the most trending item instantly, and it has affected. We're also only scratching the tip of the iceberg of where this is going to go. Every bank in the United Kingdom now has to reply to the Financial Conduct Authority about its links to Mossack Fonseca. They all had links to Mossack Fonseca. Mossack Fonseca was the place you went to do the things that nobody else would do. So there's a lot more to find in there. And I think Mossack Fonseca, I think, was also the 3rd largest of these kinds of companies. There are plenty more of them out there, and I think there's a lot more stories to come. So I think actually, we were very fortunate, in a sense, about the other international stories that happened that week. But the key to it was launching it instantly in one place. It wasn't one of those in all places at the same time. And again, I think Jared and my team did an astounding job of wrestling that herd. This was not a story that one organization had and then spread out. It went bam.
Without question. Audience, the remainder is yours. We have microphones, hands, absolutely.
Thanks. Hi. Question for Peter, really, but for both of you. In fact, you touched on it.
You've got a clue who you are.
Sorry, my name's Matt Kelly. Sorry, thank you, Peter Bell. I'm fascinated. You touched on it about the leak not leaking. That's the thing that fascinates me. The fact that this journalists being what they are, being in that domain for so long with gobby journalists, telling their wives and their boyfriends, their girlfriends. Just give us a bit more colour about the organisation and the security and the measures that you put in place to ensure that didn't happen.
Let me give you one bit of colour, and then I'm sure Sebastian will have real colour in this. So poor Jared had to go to Iceland at one point to comfort the poor guy in Iceland who had quit his job to do this story, had put sort of newspapers or brown paper over his windows because anybody in Iceland can look into everybody's other windows and see what he's doing. And so he had to hunker down. I think he might have told his wife. His wife was pretty irritated about him giving up his job. And he's the person who brought down the Prime Minister, who led to the yogurt and bananas being thrown at the Reykjavik Parliament. The amount of emotional and actual hand-holding and support that my team, that Jared and Marina, have offered to people in the consortium is extraordinary. But I think there's also a need-to-know aspect of this, is that I knew about it relatively early, but I chose not to know quite a lot about it as well. And also, the way I think the consortium worked is that no one wanted to be the person who messed it up for anybody else. because they kind of had a fairly good idea after about May, I would say, after that meeting in Washington, just how big it was going to be, and no one wanted to screw it up, which I think is a huge achievement too. But maybe you were much closer to it than I was.
Well, the main effort was to really create a team. Because if you have a team and everybody understands how important it is that nothing really leaks, then everybody will try to stick to it. And what we learned from offshore leaks was, it was the first really big investigation, that you have far more impact if you go at the same time. So everybody knew if we would have done our German stories, alone and a month before, that would have just been disappeared. No one would have really cared. Maybe in Germany, but it would not have been the big wave that you get if this has been published at the same time as in The Guardian and the Le Monde and. So one thing was, it's for the good of all. And then, we all know that we as journalists, we tend to tell stories, and we want to tell stories to our relatives and to our friends, and want to show how good and how cool we are and what we are knowing. So it's been really hard for me, for example, not to tell. And I received a lot of fun from my family and friends for being so secretive. But, we had one big rule, and the big rule was shut up and encrypt. And this is the most important rule, to not make it really leak. But in the end, I have to admit, it leaked. It was not that there was no leak at all. I met people in December in London who said, you're working on this really secret operation, I know, so blink, blink. And, but they didn't know a lot. Yeah. And the material we had, was about persons who tend to sue you if you are stating things and you cannot prove it. And nobody outside had the material, had the documents we had. So we knew that the Spiegel magazine, our main competitor in Germany, they knew months before that there would be a big bam, and they knew that it's very secretive, but they didn't knew really what it was about, and if they knew, they didn't have enough to really scoop us. So this was the other secret, the nature of the leak.
Question in that row.
Don't play werewolf with Bastian later.
What did
Matt, if you can
Never
pass
play
the
that.
mic down the row, and question in row 3 here.
Bastian? What did the typical work day look like, and did your wives know?
My wife?
Yeah.
Yeah. I had to tell her. When I was staying away all the time. And no, seriously, I had to tell her when we saw that it could get really dangerous. When we found names of, like drug dealers and autocrats and Vladimir Putin's best buddy, this was the time when it would have been very unfair not to tell her what's in there. And she's a journalist too, so she understands, and she's better in keeping her mouth shut than I am. So I think she was no danger for the project. And the typical workday, we had 2 periods. The one period was until we started to write the book. This was when we were only doing, investigations on the whole stuff. So we started in the morning looking for names, looking for relations, and the most days when I came home, I didn't really work. Sometimes when my wife went sleep, I stayed up and we call it fishing. It's you type a name in Blacklight, the search engine, which is like Google in a way. So you are looking for name, and if you press enter, you could have a huge story, because if the chancellor is in, you have a good story. So you're thrilled the whole time, because you always hope that this name might be in. And you really get addicted to this. I was a complete addict, and I still am. And you have to tell yourself, okay, I will look for 30 names and then I go to bed. And phase 2 was when we started to write the book, because we had to write it in the night because it was a private issue and not of Süddeutsche Zeitung. So this was when I didn't go to bed the most days of the week without writing some lines, some pages of the book. And Frederick started very early, so he started at like 4 o'clock in the morning. I can't get up this early, so I have to work late. And this was our work shift, how we divided it. And we got really tired over the month, but now I'm getting rest again.
It's like Obermeyer 24/7.
Yeah, not nearly, yeah.
Yeah,
with the
I
mic?
have a mic.
Oh, can we get that mic over to Molly, and we'll take the question where the mic is?
Yeah, it's here.
There we go.
I'm Martin Johnson from Sweden. Question for Bastian. I read your book, which I can recommend. You quote quite a few of the conversations you had with the source in the book, and sometimes he or she is quite irritated with you for taking so long to publish, and sometimes he or she is worried about his or her safety. What was your relationship really like, and how much did you worry about his or her safety?
Well, I worry a lot, obviously, and because, if you have an investigation and you make a mistake and your source is in danger, then the whole thing is worth nothing because you just failed. So I'm very happy that I'm in a position that I can't make this mistake because I don't know the source. We had a lot of disputes about the time because the source wanted us to publish in the beginning. He or she thought that we would publish maybe in 4 weeks. And, in the first days, I didn't say that this is not going to happen because it's a bad idea to just be very impolite to your source. So I explained, and then I said we have to postpone it. And then, he or she accepted the reasons, and he or she wanted it to be an international thing. So when I said we will distribute it, this takes time, the source understood this, and we got many discussions about this when we postponed it to November, and then we said, well, we have to go next year, and then we have to go in April. He or she was very upset, so we had really long arguments, and it's not funny to discuss via chat, and so I got to know the personality quite good, I think. Although I don't know the identity, I still have a feeling or kind of feeling who the person is I was talking to or chatting with.
Peter, we have
a member of the board of directors of Centre for Public Integrity. Yeah, and none of them did until and but can I also say that having people like Molly on your board of directors to support this and not know themselves the risks we're putting the organisation through is also really important. So I suspect that no system is truly secure. I suspect that you can only do the best you can to protect your sources. And I suspect you have to assume that certain elements of it are visible. It's one of the, there are certain people's clouds we won't use for anything like this. Everything is searchable, everything is searched. But again, so, of course, if I were Edward Snowden, I would now leak to us. I think the thing that I would stress about, I don't really have a good answer for what you're saying about the security element. I think that nothing is truly secure. And actually, one of the other, what is truly secure is air gaps and, carrying things around hidden on your body or in your body, if you like. Not that I want to go there particularly, but I do think that the model of this was journalistic. This is not about spraying the whole leak out everywhere to endanger the tens of thousands of people who are innocent parties in this, or their children, or anything else like that. The fact that everything in this has had a journalistic filter, and that public interest, which we've taken from things David Cameron has said to protect us from public interest in the UK, which is great, things that the President has said in the United States, we've truly gone for only public interest aspects on this story. Vladimir Putin is public interest. He happens to be the president of the Russian Federation. You know, this is not a conspiracy. He's an interesting guy. You know, so there's been a journalistic lens through this, which would also be a journalistic lens that we would put any national security stuff that we had through as well. So, and I don't want to intend that to be an attack on WikiLeaks. What I'm saying is that I incredibly admired what Alan Rusbridger did by putting, and Julian Assange at that time, because it put the whole thing through a journalistic lens, which I think protected people. The fact that they then published it is not what we're about. Would you, Sebastian, do you want to answer that one about security, Sebastian, because you know better than I do?
Well, we did a lot, of course, at Süddeutsche Zeitung. So the data are stored on air gaps that have no connection to anything in a room that is only be allowed for 5 people who can go in, not our editor-in-chief, not our security, not the guys cleaning. So we did a lot to make sure or to make it as impossible as we could, not to endanger anybody. But yes, we are not MI5. So there might be people who are better in this than we. We got people, external people who told us how to do it best. We didn't tell them what we are having. We just said we want to learn in general how this is done. So we did all we could, and I'm quite confident that we didn't lose anything. So the data are not flying around, and the stories are all hold until we published. We didn't lose any story, which I find very unlikely, or found very unlikely. I was very sure that we would lose 2 or 3 stories, along the way. But we'll never know probably if the Secret Service knew or not. But I guess not, because it's not their main interest. It's not about nuclear weapons. So it's, I think, very, very important, but I think it's not their main aim and main area.
Okay, our last question.
My question was mostly answered. Actually, this was the same topic that I would be very curious about, because normally when we do investigative journalism, we feel like we are in Boy Scouts compared to those people who are professionally, and in terms of their equipment, and in terms of their legal possibilities, which are beyond the normal legal system. We feel like we have way less power, and I'm just amazed by what you are just suggesting, that even if they had some information on what you were doing, they did not even try to interfere anyhow, because the very statement that it's not a question of national security does not mean that it's not a question of those people who are protected by professional, high-level secret services. And I'm just wondering if you encountered any signs of them being interested while you were not publishing yet. So just to make it more specific, what you already touched upon.
So we haven't been contacted by anybody before we published. So we did, all this stuff, and we knew that there's some things that really work, like PGP. I mean, PGP is just working, and it's very helpful. And if you use it and if you don't make mistakes, nobody gets into this. And, after we published, we did some things already before. I have destroyed all devices that I had contacted the source with. So I really, with a hammer, hit my iPhone and all the other devices used for direct communication in some way, and we changed other things we had, and then in the last weeks we got people, calling or writing emails saying, I'm calling you on behalf of a big organization, of a governmental organization, and we are interested in the data. And I said, well, I can imagine. Sorry. And they said, why don't we meet? And I said, because I don't want. And so there have been organizations, but it's not huge, and they seem to accept a no, unless, I don't know, they're going behind the curtain. But we are not working with any secret service. That's not part of our job. So if the leaker one day decides to leak the material to authorities too, which would make sense in a way, if you want the people to get in jail, you have to give the authorities the data. So, but I don't know if this is the case, and I'm certainly not in the middle of this process.
I just want to thank you both, Bastian and Peter, for not only the extraordinary journalistic effort, but for giving us the opportunity to hear the extraordinary story behind the story. So I just thank you.